Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and it is Monday, Memorial Day, and I hope you are having a good Memorial Day, obviously remembering those that made this day possible. I was not available on Sunday to do breaches of the week, so we are doing it today on Memorial Day, but obviously this will cover through Sunday yesterday, so this should be pretty complete. And as always, I'd like to thank the following people that sent me a lot of this information, and that would be Jason Dance, Barrett Peterson, Sarah Harpens, William Lassers, and Stephen Doper, or Dopper, and Stephen, I apologize, I'm not sure which it is, but thank you so very much to all of you for sending these in. And let's start out big with Verizon, because Verizon has experienced a data breach where the full names, email addresses, and corporate ID numbers, as well as phone numbers of Verizon employees were compromised, according to a report from Vice, Motherboard by Vice. Now, Verizon has also confirmed this data breach, though the company said it will not engage with the attacker because Verizon does not believe the information is sensitive. Now, as to how this data came to light, it was a result of an attacker reaching out to Motherboard by Vice to share the information with the publication. There is no clear indication of just how up-to-date this information is, but it does appear to contain a mix of current and previous employees, according to Vice. So there you go. If you work for Verizon, heads up to you. Moving on, I want to give you an update on the cloud-based repository hosting service known as GitHub, now owned by Microsoft. This past Friday, they shared additional details into the theft of its integration with OAuth tokens last month. I talked about it then, noting that the attacker was able to access internal NPM data and its customer information. What we now know is what exactly was stolen, and I'll go down that list. There are 3 different points right here. Number 1 is, and I quote, a database backup of the skimdb.npmjs.com consisting of data as of April 7, 2021, including an archive of user information from 2015 and all private NPM package manifests and package metadata. The archive contained NPM usernames, password hashes, and email addresses for roughly 100,000 users. On top of that, point number 2, and I quote, a set of CSV or comma-separated values files encompassing an archive of all names and version numbers of published versions of all NPM private packages as of April 10, 2022. And point number 3, and I quote, a small subset of private packages from 2 organizations. So there you go. If you use GitHub, you definitely want to check in. Moving on. Let's talk about Twitter, and I actually did a video / podcast on this one earlier in the week. So here's a quick recap of that video where I talk about this at length. Federal regulators this past Wednesday announced that Twitter will pay a $150 million fine to settle allegations that it deceptively used email addresses and phone numbers it had collected from you, Twitter users, to target advertising in one of the largest privacy settlements the federal regulators have reached with Twitter. Basically, what was happening was you were supplying information such as your phone number for the purpose of having, let's say, multi-factor authentication. They were not allowed to use that phone number then for any other purpose unless they expressly told you that. So instead, they just took that phone number, sold it to advertisers, and here we are, $150 million. We all may be entitled to compensation if you're on Twitter, and if you follow me, you know I am. Moving on, let's talk about Canadian healthcare provider Scarborough Health Network out of Toronto, Canada's largest city. Now, in a breach notice, SHN, Scarborough Health Network, explained that its IT staff noticed unusual activity on its systems on January 25th. Now, after containing the problem and calling in the experts, an investigation discovered a subset of data on SHN's servers that had been accessed by unauthorized parties. We are talking patient names, birth dates, email addresses, home addresses, lab reports, diagnosis information, medical procedure details, insurance policy numbers, details of attending physicians, and more. Now, the data is limited to patients admitted to an SHN hospital rather than the many more that were receiving things like vaccinations at their clinics leading up to and during the COVID-19 pandemic. So heads up, citizens of Scarborough, your healthcare has been hit. As far as I know, your fare is still fine. Moving on, let's talk about Florida-based Lakeview Loan Servicing LLC. They are actually the 4th largest loan servicing company in the United States, and this is an update on their data breach. They are facing at least 2 proposed class action lawsuits as a result of their late 2021 data breach that reportedly affected more than 2.5 million of their customers. At least a dozen Civil lawsuits have been filed against the company, all seeking class action status. These lawsuits have been consolidated in federal court in Florida, although one in South Carolina is still pending separately. Now, these lawsuits claim that because of this breach, class members suffered ascertainable losses, including out-of-pocket expenses and time incurred to remedy and mitigate the effects of the attack. Those affected also face substantial risk of having their personal information compromised, including their names, addresses, loan numbers, and social security numbers here in the United States. So if you have anything to do or have been a customer of Lakeview Loan Servicing, you might want to check in. You could probably be part of a class action. Moving on. Let's talk about All Well Behavioral Services, or Behavioral Health Services, out of Ohio. They recently confirmed a data breach after an unauthorized person was able to access their company's network. According to All Well, the breach resulted, in the following information being compromised on patients: names, dates of birth, social security numbers, phone numbers, treatment activity, treatment provider, treatment date, treatment location, and payer information. Now, on May 23rd of this year, All Well provided notice of breach to all affected parties by sending out their required notification letters. So I guess things are not all well at All Well Behavioral Health Services. I'm not going to give up my day job. Trust me. Moving on. Let's talk about the Camden, New Jersey-based Cooper University Healthcare. They notified patients about a data breach that may have compromised their protected health information. Here's what's going on. On December 13 of last year, they learned that an employee's email account had been basically accessed without authorization on November 21st, and that's according to a May 25 press release. An investigation conducted on May 10th determined that basically the following information was hit. We're talking names, dates of birth, medical professional names, diagnosis and treatment information, billing and claims information, and medical record numbers. The health system did not identify how many patients were affected, but it says it has no evidence that this was misused. This information was misused, which is a very standard thing they all say because it's very hard to prove. So there you go. If you have anything to do with Cooper University Healthcare in Camden, New Jersey, check in. Moving on, let's talk about Optoma Technology Incorporated. They reported a data breach following a ransomware attack in which unauthorized parties were able to access the computer systems for 10 days. Now, according to Optoma, the breach resulted in the following information getting hit. We're talking names, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, state ID numbers, financial account information, payment information, health insurance information, usernames, and passwords. On May 24th of this year, Optoma filed an official notice of data breach, and there you go. So if you have anything to do with Optoma Technology, check it out. Moving on. Let's talk about the massive truck carrier CR England, because they notified customers this past week that their personal information may have been compromised in a data breach that occurred last fall. Apparently, their spokesperson confirmed the letter and said the company had been the victim of quote-unquote unauthorized activity on October 30th of last year. Now, this process was not quick to ID everything, according to their letter, and they said it was not until April 20th that they concluded that the files affected with the data breach contained some of your personal information, quote unquote. Now, in basically a post to the legal website JD Supra, basically the law firm that is representing basically the victims said that the breach was believed to have affected 224,500 individuals whose social security numbers may have been compromised, CR England being one of the largest carriers in the United States. Moving on, let's talk about Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. You'd think it would be in Washington. It is not. Now, according to Washington University School of Medicine site, they basically learned that an unauthorized person gained access to an employee email account between March 4th through the 28th of this year. An investigation conducted on March 24th was unable to determine whether the individual viewed any of the emails or attachments. However, the health system did identify that the emails contained patient and research participant information, which included names, dates of birth, addresses, medical records, patient account numbers, and clinical information. In some instances, health insurance information and social security numbers were also identified in the account. So if you have anything to do with the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, heads up to you. Moving on, let's talk about Biolase Incorporated, because recently Biolase reported and an unauthorized party gained access to their computer network as well. It's kind of a common theme here. Now, as a result, the company confirmed sensitive consumer data was basically obtained on the network that was compromised. Now, while Biolase has yet to publicly disclose what type of information was involved in this breach, on May 20th of this year, they filed an official notice of breach. So there you go. So if you have anything to do with Biolase Inc. for whatever they do, there you go. Moving on, let's talk about Jackson County Hospital District in the state of Florida. Recently, they confirmed that they experienced a data breach after an unauthorized party gained access to the hospital's computer network and sensitive patient and employee data contained within. Now, according to Jackson Hospital, the breach resulted in names, dates of birth, contacts information, social security, medical history, medical conditions or treatment information, medical record numbers, diagnosis codes, patient account numbers, and more being compromised. In all, 98,746 patients and employees are believed to be impacted by this breach, and on May 6th, they filed their official notice as well. So if you use or work for the Jackson County Hospital or Jackson County Hospital District in the state of Florida, heads up to you. Moving on, let's talk about Alameda Health System in sunny California, because they recently filed a notice with the federal government indicating that they experienced the breach in their email system. Evidently, the Alameda Health System breach affected 90,000 people, although basically they have not indicated yet what was hit or breached. So obviously I will be giving you updates as soon as we know that, but heads up, all of you patients at Alameda Health System in California around San Francisco. Beautiful area. Moving on, let's talk about the Shank Medical Center. Not sure where they are, but the Shank Medical Center recently reported that they essentially an unauthorized party gained access to their computer network and essentially got a whole bunch of information. And according to Shank, the breach resulted in names, social security numbers, protected health information on certain patients being compromised. And on May 13th, they also filed as well. So heads up to you if you are a patient at Shank Medical Center, wherever that is. I'm assuming here in the United States, given that they filed with the Department of HHS. Moving on, let's talk about First Financial Credit Union. They are based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They filed a notice of data breach. They also post this on their website, and essentially an unauthorized party was actually able to gain files containing sensitive information. More specifically, they disclosed the leaked information includes members' names, addresses, social security numbers, driver's license, government IDs, bank account information, and credit card info. On April 6th of this year, First Financial provided an official notice of this incident. So if you have anything to do with First Financial Credit Union out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, heads up to you. Moving on to the Great White North, let's talk about the Calgary Urban Project Society, or CUPS. This is a nonprofit. They sent an email, and this is interesting because I think this is the Canadian reporting, but they sent emails probably to a whole bunch of people. But in this case, they built a narrative around it for the reporting that I'm going to do here based off of Global up in Canada. Now, they sent an email to Michael Friesen this past Wednesday to inform him that a staff member's account had been hit and some of his personal information may have been put out there. That information included his driver's license, bank statements, and rent report. Now, Friesen was a CUPS client in 2020 after fleeing an abusive relationship. He provided this nonprofit with his personal information so that it could help him access funding for a place to live. CUPS, if you didn't know, and I didn't until I was reading about this, helps vulnerable, citizens of Calgary facing the challenges of both poverty and trauma and offer support services for them. Obviously, these are people that need help, and they are giving a lot of sensitive information to this nonprofit. Now, Friesen said that he appreciates the help that CUP has been in the past for him, but he wishes that he had been told sooner about this September hit. That's right, this came out in September, or rather, they were attacked in September, and we're only learning about this now. The more you delay, the harder it is for people to understand where their identity theft problems come from. We've got to get this information out as fast as we can, providing it's safe to do so. I've talked about that many times, many times, and here we are. So let's head back on down to the United States and go to scenic Champaign, Illinois, home of the University of Illinois, but we're going to be talking about Christie Clinic based in Champaign. Now, they suffered a data breach that basically put the personal data of 502,869 people at risk, according to the HHS. Now, one of Christie's clinic's business email accounts was accessed by an unauthorized user between July 14th through August 19th of last year, and that is according to their March 24 statement. Now, an investigation suggested that the purpose was to intercept business transactions between Christie Clinic and a third-party vendor. That's very common, known as a business email compromise scam, to basically change invoices to reroute payments and all those kinds of things. We see that constantly. Now, the affected individuals that may have had their personal information compromised, those 500,000+ patients, includes their names, addresses, social security numbers, medical information, and health insurance information. No electronic medical records were directly accessed as a result of this business email compromise scam or attempt at a scam. So heads up to you, Christie Clinic patients in or around Champaign, Illinois. Moving on, let's talk about the Drug Enforcement Agency, or DEA, because they are investigating a potential law enforcement system data breach associated with an online harassment community that impersonates police officers. Now, I've talked about this one before. This is some updated information on that because Krebs on Security's author, journalist Brian Krebs, received a tip that attackers had gained access to the esp.usdoj.gov database, and there's a whole bunch of different agencies that now access this, but here we are basically understanding now who was accessing this information, because Krebs obtained this information from the administrator of the Doxbin cyberbullying community, identified as KT. They have links to the Lapsus hacking group, and so obviously that's who's looking at the DEA as well as other law enforcement and intelligence communities as they are attempting to and basically impersonate these agents and break into these databases. So obviously that's a huge problem. The DEA now declaring this as well. Moving on, let's talk about General Motors. Yes, one of the largest, if not the largest car maker on the planet. GM disclosed that they were the victim of a credential stuffing attack last month that exposed some of their customers' information and allowed attackers to redeem reward points for gift cards. Now, General Motors operates an online platform to help owners of their Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac brands, specifically the vehicles. They help their customers manage their bills, their different services, and also redeem reward points if you have things like credit cards, meaning you're using that GM-backed credit card, you're getting points towards money off your next car, whatever that is. Now, GM disclosed that they detected a malicious login activity between April 11 and through April 29th of this year, and confirmed that the attackers were indeed redeeming customer reward points for gift cards in some cases. So heads up to you. If you have a Chevy, Buick, GMC, or Caddy, you definitely want to check in, especially if you're using their portal. Make sure your points are there, all good. If not, contact GM and hopefully they can help. Moving on, we've got another airline this week. This one is Spicejet out of India. They were forced to cancel and delay flights due to a ransomware attack that left some customers stranded at airports or even inside the airplanes themselves. Spicejet says the incident basically was this. Somebody tried to encrypt their systems. Quote, certain Spicejet systems faced an attempted ransomware attack last night that has impacted our flight operations, and that's what the company tweeted, and there you go. Quote, while our IT team has to a large extent contained and rectified the situation, this has had a cascading effect on our flights, leading to delays. Now, customers have taken to social media, obviously, to complain. In some cases, passengers have encountered flight cancellations or delays at their airports that lasted several hours. And can you imagine being on an airplane, like literally like sitting at the gate or maybe even taxiing to the runway, and you have to go back to the gate because the airline itself has got a data breach and they can't coordinate anything? That is... I've never had that. I've had some other crazies that have made me go back to the gate, especially in the anti-masking era on airplanes, but nevertheless, here we are. That's absolutely nuts. So heads up to you, Spicejet travelers out of India. Moving on, let's talk about the payment gateway firm RazorPay. They also happen to be out of India because the Southeast Cybercrime Police are investigating a fraudulent case where an attacker stole 7.3 million rupees over 3 months by exploiting the authorization process of essentially this payment processor. Essentially, what they found was due to an audit of their transactions, they couldn't account for 7.3 million rupees against 831 unique transactions that should not have been authorized through their system. Obviously, that's a huge problem. So if you use RazorPay out of India, you definitely want to check in. Moving on, let's head on back to the United States and talk about Somerset County in New Jersey. They are still dealing with the aftermath of a ransomware attack that began this past Tuesday, and here we are. Officials in Somerset, which has a population of about 350,000 and is just north of Princeton University, announced on Tuesday that their email system was shut down. The county basically had it so bad that they had to create temporary Gmail accounts so that residents can contact, quote, critical departments such as the county commissioners, health, emergency operations, the county clerk, sheriff, and surrogates. County officials urged anyone basically coming to county offices to call ahead to confirm that their services were actually still available. The county was forced to cancel a board of commissioners meeting, but County Administrator Colleen Marr said the county is still able to perform most of its functions. So heads up, Somerset County. Now, the other thing I find interesting about this too is that they immediately, as a contingency plan, probably on the fly, said, oh, our email's down, let's go to Gmail and start creating just free Gmail accounts to get these things done, which in and of itself could be considered a data breach, because if I am a citizen of Somerset County emailing, let's say, the health department on some personal matter, guess who's data mining that now? While my message is getting to the Somerset County Health Department, Google is data mining the bejesus out of everything. So that might be a data breach in and of itself. That would be an interesting case study. And I'm going to see if I can probably get somebody, like let's say the county administrator, Colleen Marr, into an interview and ask her that question. That just came to me off the top of my head, but I think that's an interesting one. Moving on, I want to give you an update on MGM Resorts. Now, if you recall, on July 20th of 2020, meaning almost 2 years ago, it was reported that an attacker going by the online handle of Night Lion stole several databases from the monitoring site data, from the breach monitoring site Data Viper. Now, one of these databases belonged to MGM Resorts and contained the personal data of 142 million of their customers. MGM is huge. Now, although at that time Night Lion was selling that data on the now seized RAIN forums and dark web marketplaces for $2,900 US, the latest report reveals that basically that same database containing those 142 million records has been repackaged and shared on Telegram for the public to go download for free. Telegram is quickly becoming the place of choice to start online marketing, selling, and brokering these things, given the security that Telegram has built around it. So heads up to you, if you stayed at an MGM resort prior to July of 2020, you're once again in the dark web being repackaged and resold, which unfortunately is a very common thing. For example, if you've been in LinkedIn, you've been in a million different repackages and basically resold and repackaged a million different times because of the 2015 LinkedIn data breach. So if you were on LinkedIn in 2015, you've already been experiencing that, myself included. And finally, and we have two finalies for you today. This is interesting. We're going to start with Mark Zuckerberg, founder and creator of Facebook, now calling themselves Meta for various marketing purposes. Now, this is coming from ABC News, and this is interesting. Here's what's going on. In Washington, D.C., their Attorney General, Karl Racine, has sued basically CEO Mark Zuckerberg for allegedly failing to protect consumer data following the Cambridge Analytica data leak. Yes, we are going all the way back to there. Quote, the evidence shows Mr. Zuckerberg was personally involved in Facebook's failure to protect the privacy and data of its users, leading directly to the Cambridge Analytica incident. This unprecedented security breach exposed tens of millions of Americans' personal information, and Mr. Zuckerberg's policies enabled a multi-year effort to mislead users about the extent of Facebook's wrongful conduct. End quote. That is from Mr. Racine in his statement and lawsuit released this past Monday. He also added, and I quote, this lawsuit is not only warranted, but necessary and sends a message that corporate leaders, including CEOs, will be held accountable for their actions. Now, end quote. The lawsuit alleges that Mr. Zuckerberg was, quote, responsible for, end quote, and, quote, had the clear ability, end quote, to control Facebook's operations and enabled Cambridge Analytica to use consumer data. The lawsuit alleges that third-party firms like Cambridge Analytica got the data from 87 million Americans and half of District Columbia residents. Now, Racine filed a lawsuit against Facebook in 2018, specifically December of 2018, for the data leak, and is bringing this suit following evidence found during that litigation, according to the Attorney General. Now, this past March, a judge ruled against an effort by Racine to add Zuckerberg as a defendant to that ongoing 2018 case. Now, Facebook has faced previous government scrutiny over the data leak into Cambridge Analytica. In 2019, the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, fined Facebook $5 billion over that incident and required the company to abide by new restrictions aimed at instituting greater accountability in the decisions that affect user privacy. Obviously, due to all the whistleblowers, we know that was BS. They haven't done anything. They honestly haven't. So the Cambridge Analytica leak, which several news outlets reported in 2018, basically concerned the London-based firm gaining access to user data in 2015 and using it to aid the presidential campaign of the presidential campaign of Donald Trump, but also the campaign of Senator Ted Cruz as well. Now, Meta, which is Facebook's parent company, declined to comment when they were asked for a comment by ABC News, where I'm getting this information. Cambridge Analytica filed for bankruptcy and began insolvency proceedings in the United States not long after the scandal broke. Obviously, who would ever want to work with them again? Mark Zuckerberg himself went in front of Congress, and Congress tanked that so unbelievably bad that he made $4 billion just sitting there answering questions over his own personal data breach that he had for 87 million Americans. It's unbelievable. Seriously, we need tech people in Congress. I should probably run at some point, but quite frankly, I really don't want death threats any more than I get just for posting these videos. So with that, we have one more finally for you. And that is the Federal Trade Commission, because of some recent and I think encouraging news overall. Here's what's going on. This is coming basically from dataprotectionreport.com. On May 20th of this year, the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, stated that failure to disclose a data breach may be a violation of Section 5 of the FTC Act. Now, historically, the FTC has not been explicit about its notification expectations, but in a blog post published basically by FTC's CTO and the Division of Privacy and Identity Protection, the Commission offered clarity, stating that, and I quote, "Regardless of whether a breach notification law applies, a breached entity that fails to disclose information to help parties mitigate reasonably foreseeable harm may violate Section 5 of the FTC Act." In other words, the FTC stated position is that Section 5 established a de facto breach reporting requirement, meaning it's not optional, you have to disclose. Now, this new disclosure requirement not only represents the FTC's commitment to promoting consumer security, but also underscores the FTC's overall interest in businesses implementing robust detection and response policies. The FTC emphasized that prompt notice of a data breach allows consumers to take post-breach remedial steps to reduce the risk of harm or exposure. That's right. If I get data breach and I don't know it for months, my social security number and all my personally identifiable information could be out there. And if I don't know to do things like have credit monitoring or freeze my credit, there you go. That's a huge problem. So getting these things turned around, especially when it comes to consumers, is very important. So how can we expect the FTC then to enforce this basic new notice requirement, even though they said it's been there the entire time? Now, to understand how the FTC plans to enforce the requirement, we need to look into a series of relatively recent enforcement actions cited by the FTC in their own blog. For example, when Uber waited over a full year to disclose a data breach to affected customers, the FTC alleged that the ride-sharing app had engaged in deceptive trade practices. The Commission also alleged that two companies, SpyPhone and SkyMed, both of which issued misleading and incomplete statements to consumers about their breaches, also engage in unfair and deceptive practices. And most recently, in March of this year, the FTC brought an action against the current and former owners of Cafe Press for failing to timely communicate the full extent of that data breach to their affected customers as well. There, and in that case, an attacker accessed over 180,000 unencrypted social security numbers, as well as millions of email addresses and passwords and other sensitive personal information. After Cafe Press received notification of that breach, it failed to take any investigatory steps, and instead of notifying consumers about the breach, it simply told consumers to change their passwords because the company had modified their password policy. There you go. I was not aware if I was a Cafe Press person, other than the fact that I had to change my password, but they said that was their own new change in enhancement for security. Now, the FTC found that many consumers were still at risk, and had the consumers known that there was a data breach, they could have taken better steps to protect themselves and their information. In response to the FTC's clarified expectations, companies have to rethink that basically their incident response plans and communication strategies may be inadequate. While state and industry-specific incident response laws are still in effect, companies must now factor in the added FTC scrutiny into their breach response plans. Further, this post emphasizes that basically disclosures need to be accurate. Accordingly, businesses that disclose breaches should take steps to ensure they are notifying the right parties in a timely manner. Businesses should think twice about under-notifying or issuing blanket notifications that don't involve specific information. Finally, the announcement underscores an existing trend that is that the FTC is looking to existing laws to expand its enforcement authority. Now, I think overall this is a good thing. Especially when it comes to consumers, having these breach notifications are beyond important because that's how we protect ourselves. Now, that said, I do understand in delaying breach notifications if it's going to basically stop a national panic because something can be remediated faster than the situation actually would aggravate, the existing, let's say, stability of the country. For that, we look at Colonial Pipeline. If we did not know, if we had zero news whatsoever for 1 week, 5 days even, that Colonial Pipeline had basically gone through a ransomware attack and they shut down the pipeline as a precaution, the pipeline wasn't hit. If we didn't know about that, we would not have seen a national panic on the eastern seaboard. People basically making runs on gas, fistfights and riots at gas stations as gas stations were running out. Had it been business as usual, basically every gas station on the eastern seaboard would not have run out of gas in those 5 days. They would have been supplied or resupplied prior to the pipeline, being turned back on, or after the pipeline was turned back on, and we would have been fine. So I think there's a balance that has to be made here. But if you are a business that caters to consumers and you have a data breach, it really behooves you, especially on the trust side, to notify us and be as communicative as you can, us meaning your consumers, in order to start regaining that trust. You will lose customers, but you will lose a lot less unless we find out a year later that you didn't tell us at all. So I think that's a huge thing. Those are your breaches of the past week. It's absolutely been nuts out there. Hopefully you weren't affected, but odds are you were. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everyone.